Welcome to RV Out West. I'm your host, Brooks. My family of four's base camp is located in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, and our RV adventures radiate from there. I'm relatively new to RVing, and a few years ago, I convinced my wife that for an anniversary present, we should buy a used tent trailer from some friends of ours. Ever since then, we have fallen head over heels for the RV life, and we now find ourselves towing a 26-foot Jayco travel trailer. So grab yourself a mug of coffee and join us as we discuss RVing around the West. From sweet camping spots, gear and equipment, to tips and tricks, we've got you covered. We are RV Out West. Thanks for joining me today. I'm excited because we are going to be chatting with YouTuber, the Bourbon Judge. He and I will talk about bourbons and my favorite campfire cocktail, the Old Fashioned. Plus, in our pit stop, we are going to be talking about a favorite hidden gem of a campground, Kayak Point. This Snohomish County park is located about 1 hour north of Seattle and is rooted with rich history. The park provides activities that are fun for the whole family. They say that the love of bourbon is not simply because of the spirit. It's based on the people and the stories you experience it with. This is why he began his bourbon journey many years ago. As a bourbon enthusiast, educator, and online creator, his goal is to share his passion by educating others of this fine spirit we call bourbon. Officially, he's known as Marcus. However, his friends call him the Bourbon Judge. Welcome, Marcus. Thanks so much for joining me.
Love it. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, we've been friends for a long time. So that just means that we're getting old.
I know. I don't really want to admit that, but yes, you're right. We are. I do want to just let everybody know too that they can follow along on the Bourbon Judge's journey, or they can follow along on your journey on Instagram, on your website, and definitely on your YouTube channel, the Bourbon Judge. And I think I'm one of the initial 5 subscribers to your channel. I think I'm one of the first 5.
You are. You were literally. You might actually have been the first. No, my wife was the first one. So I have to give her credit.
Yeah, I think I was number 2. I don't think the Mrs. Judge beat me to that one. So
exactly, you're number 2. So we go way back, Brooke. So glad to be here, man.
Well, so I want to dig into bourbons before we get into anything. What is it? First off, what is it that you're drinking right now? Because I've got a High West Prairie Dog bourbon from High West. It's delicious. But I want to know what you're drinking.
Yeah, so I'm currently drinking Bardstown Bourbon Company, based out of Kentucky. This is their Piper Pavitt, so it's a wine finish. What I love about Bardstown is that they're really creative. They're like the new kids on the block. They take their own bourbon and then they mix it with other bourbon companies, distilleries from either Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee, whomever it might be. And then they always typically finish it in like a wine cask or some other type of like a rum and so forth. So really cool distillery. They're almost like the new age. They're the new up and coming guys, if you will.
That's cool. And I think of them. I'm going to have to try and see if I can find them at my local stores around here, because finishing them in a rum cask or a wine cask or something probably gives some really fun and unique finishing notes.
Absolutely. Cool. Yeah.
So, now, specifically for you, what is it about bourbons? How long have you been drinking bourbons? What is it about bourbons? Sure, it's about the stories and the experience, but I mean, you could drink gin, you could be a rum drinker, why not scotch? So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so it's one of those things, Brooks, where bourbon runs in my family. So my family is from Cincinnati, Ohio, to right there on the Kentucky border. So as a kid, I grew up in Jersey, but as a kid, every summer, going to Cincinnati, hanging out with my aunts, my uncles, everyone drank bourbon. So it's almost like it's almost like part of my DNA, if you will. So as I got older, post college years, we had some beers. I started to really learn a lot more about bourbon and just started to appreciate it. And fast forward, let's call it the last 10 years, everything, when I'm hanging out with friends, having a good time, or just sitting back on my own, bourbon just does it for me. It just works well. It's such a great spirit. It really is.
And you've had your cousin on your show a couple of different times, if I recall.
Yeah. Cousin Anita, she's well loved.
She's a hoot, man. She's awesome.
Indeed.
When you're not drinking your bourbon neat or on the rocks, What is your go-to
Hmm.
bourbon cocktail?
Oh man. So for me personally, it's probably an old fashioned, right? Because an old fashioned is just like the quintessential bourbon cocktail. I mean, there's whiskey sours, there's a ton of different drinks out there, but an old fashioned for me just kind of hits home. You got the bitters. I do it with like an orange peel, and I love doing the orange peel
Oh
all
yeah.
around the
Yeah.
glass. Ah,
100%. I'm
I
with you. That's beautiful. It's a thing of beauty
love
right
it,
there.
love it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
It's funny. So I just was out visiting my folks, and I was
Mhm.
talking to them about old fashions, and I was drinking an old fashioned one night, and I had no idea. But my great granny, like old school great granny, the old fashioned was her go to cocktail. And she would drink it when she was camping. She would drink it at the beach, like, born in like 1913 or something. I mean, she's long since passed away, but I mean, that was her go to cocktail. So the fact that I love an old fashioned, I had no idea that my great granny enjoyed them too, which is kind of fun.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool. Yeah, it's one of those things where like your great granny and I have so many aunts and uncles now that they know I'm like they call me like the Bourbon Judge, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
Everyone says how much like they've loved an old fashioned themselves for years and years. So it's such a quintessential drink. It really is.
But if I were to pinpoint you right now
All
and
right.
nail you down, hold you down and
Ooh.
be like, this is it. What has been the
Uh-oh.
most interesting bourbon you've tasted and why?
Oh gosh. All right. You're hitting me with the good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. So
All
what?
right. So I'm gonna drop some knowledge in you and for all of your viewers and your guests that listen to your show every week. I will tell you one of the best bourbons out there. It's not what everyone thinks. It's not the Pappy Van Winkle. You can take all the Pappies and let's just call them throw them in the garbage.
Ooh.
there's a company called Joseph Magnus. They make a cigar blend. So Joseph Magnus, huge bourbon company, not huge, but I guess they're decent size. They make many of their bourbons are cast finish, right? So
Yep.
this cigar blend is finished in a brandy. I'm sorry, no, in an armagnac, a cognac, and a sherry cast finish. So it's a triple cast. That is my just go-to bourbon. It goes great with a cigar. It goes great without a cigar. It's fantastic.
That is awesome. Okay. And what kind of price point are we talking about on that?
Oh, so unfortunately, that one's a little bit pricier.
That's okay.
It's about $150.
Okay.
But if you ever find it, if you find it anywhere, please buy it because it's wonderful. And if
No,
you don't like it, you can
yeah,
send it to me.
yeah, I'm sure you'd appreciate that. It's
Awesome.
funny though, as we're getting ready to kind of talk a little bit about the old fashioned, did you know that hopefully I don't hopefully if people are listening from Wisconsin and I say something a little whatever, they'll correct me, but from my research, and I've spent some time in Madtown, which by the way,
Mhm.
Madison is a fantastic city. There's a
Is
lot
it
of really cool things in Madison. Yeah. Good food,
awesome?
really good cocktails and whatever. I mean, it's just lots to do. It's a cool town. But there's a spot in Madison called the Old Fashioned. So I went.
What?
Yep, I met a friend of mine from there. We did cheese curds and old fashions.
Mhm.
But what's interesting is that Wisconsin old fashions are brandy based. So they use brandy instead of bourbon. And then they'll either use, instead of simple syrup, they'll
Mhm.
replace it with like a 7-Up or a Sprite. So just doing the same amount that you would do with the
Ah,
simple syrup, but you would do it with
sure.
a Sprite or a 7-Up, one of those kind of like bubbly sodas.
Interesting. Did
Yeah,
not know that. Wow. Is that like a Wisconsin like tradition? Like, does that go back a long time?
there's really like two old fashions. They're two different drinks, but
Okay.
personally, the Wisconsin version has probably a little bit more of a solid history to it. Um,
Ah.
yeah, John Dye, who's an owner of a legendary cocktail lounge in Milwaukee called Bryant's, said it's
Mhm.
been served in old man's basement and in corner bars consistently for well over 100 years. Whereas the classic old fashioned that people refer
Mhm.
to now has only seen a resurgence in popularity in the last 5 years or so.
Yeah.
Um, in the late 70s, you couldn't get a bourbon old fashioned anywhere, but you could always get an old fashioned in Wisconsin. And people around the country who appreciate the Angostura bitters should appreciate Wisconsin for keeping it in business through the dark ages of cocktails. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And I mean, when I was there, I obviously was like, okay, I'm gonna have a Wisconsin old fashioned, and it was good. I mean, it's a little different than what I'm traditionally used to, but now I want to get into some specific bourbons that you think pair really well with that classic old-fashioned cocktail. So do you have like some recommendations? I mean, so typically, like I will go Maker's Mark. I will go, Bullet. I know, Bullet, both the orange label, and then I actually just recently I also started using the rye and doing like an old-fashioned with the Bullet green label rye. But that's kind of in that out here.
Sure.
Pre-tax, that's like in the $26 for a fifth to $30 price point range. But if I wanted to kick it up a notch, because whatever, I got a reason to celebrate a birthday or a Father's Day or whatever. Talk to me.
Yeah. So the cool thing about an old fashioned is when you're mixing it with a bourbon, depending on the mood you're in, will dictate the type of old fashioned you have, right? So let me give you a good example. Traditionally, 9 out of 10 times I'm having an old fashioned. I'm gonna have it with probably like maybe like a Knob Creek, right? Knob Creek, it's a $25 bottle of bourbon, nice and smooth, goes well with an old fashioned, right? But there's sometimes like like in the wintertime a lot, I love a rye, right? And the rye is still whiskey. And I'll take like an Old Forester rye, which is, we're talking like a $22 bottle of whiskey, right? So an Old Forester rye, replace that in your old fashioned. And it's going to be a bit more earthy, a bit more of a bite, a little bit spicier, which honestly probably is great when you're camping as well. So I love a great old fashioned with a rye whiskey versus a bourbon, actually.
Okay. And probably actually that Old Forester sounds a little bit more chewy.
Yeah, it is. Oh, way more chewy. I mean, you're talking about campfire.
Yeah,
man, nothing like in a good old fashioned with a rye whiskey versus a bourbon, sitting by a campfire.
Yep.
Sign me up.
Kids are making s'mores, and I'm feet up in a rocking camp chair, and just like, hey, man, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, what if I wanted to go with something? It's hard though, right? If I'm going to go with something a little bit nicer, even in more of the 50, 60. And if I've had a couple of old fashions, it's weird. The more old fashions I have,
all right,
the less rocks, the less Angostura bitters, the less simple syrup, and pretty much it just becomes neat.
Okay.
I said as the night goes on, there's less and less mixing and just putting in a glass. So maybe it's time then to switch out from that. That Makers or that Bullet or that Old Forester into something a little more better.
A little harder?
The Mrs. RV out west this year for Christmas. I must have been a good boy. You know why?
Why? What'd you get?
I got an ice maker for my trailer. What? I can now make rocks. Every 6 minutes, this little thing kicks out rocks. And they're tiny little rocks. They melt really quickly. So they're good for like a cocktail shaker to make something like a Manhattan to shake up a Manhattan and do it that way. But sitting around a campfire, it doesn't matter. You just throw a couple of rocks in your drink and you're good. So
makes it all good. That's awesome. So let me ask you a question real quick. So what's your go-to bourbon when you're sitting by, you got the whole RV, you're camping, you're with all your friends, everyone's hanging out, laughing, right? The guys doing their thing, the ladies are doing their thing. Yep. What's in your glass? What's your go-to bourbon?
That's a really great question. So I'm a little all over the map. So, I'm a bit of a bourbon neophyte, right? I'm relatively new. I mean, I like bourbons and whiskeys and whatever, but I would say like Woodford Reserve or Knob Creek or those. If I'm doing more like just kind of on the rocks or even a little neat.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, usually though, I like Makers. I haven't had it in a while because I've really I've been getting into rye. So it's funny you mentioned rye. So I've been enjoying and learning a bit about rye, but like Makers has a little bit more of those like cherry notes that I kind of like
do.
and whatever, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, yeah. Makers has actually come a long way, honestly. And if it sounds like you're trying to get back into it. I think you like Makers because they recently put out a couple new versions. But even like just the Makers 46, $32 bottle of bourbon, tons of cherry because it's a wheated bourbon, right? So that's like the difference of Makers. It's a wheated bourbon, tons of cherry notes, very just soft and just sweet and natural. Goes great with an old fashioned, but even by itself, neat or even on the rocks, it's a solid bourbon all day. It really is.
I mean, this High West that I'm having, I should just bring camping. This is just a nice, I'm having it neat and just, pour a little in a low ball and have some. The craft distillery movement here in Washington State and on the West Coast is exploding. I mean, we know about Woodinville whiskey. That's kind of one of the first ones that kind of broke into the area.
Sure.
But like out on Whidbey Island where my folks live, there's a small little craft distillery that just opened up. And or I don't know about just opened up, but my parents picked up a bottle and it's a wheat whiskey. Because apparently when you look to get your distiller's license in the state, there's some rules around it. I don't know all the rules, so don't quote me on this, but you have to use there's a certain percentage and it's large. It's at least 50. I think it might be more percent of your mash has to come from agriculture within the state to help support the farmers and the, agriculture within the state. So we have a huge wheat region out in Eastern Washington in the Palouse. And so this is it's called the Palouse whiskey, and it's all a bunch of wheat whiskey and whatever. And I had some of that at my folks' house, and it was delicious. I mean, it was it just was a little bit different, but different isn't bad. It was nice. But you know what, too? The other thing, I'm going to just do a quick plug, and I know because your Trader Joe's out there doesn't sell liquor, which is a wah
bad.
But the Trader Joe's bourbon is out here. It is a $17 bottle, pre-tax, $17 bottle.
Really? Wow.
And it is amazing for the price point.
Oh my God.
Right? I mean, you're not going to put it up against something that's been finished and aged and whatever.
Sure, yeah.
But for a $17 bottle of whiskey, it's incredible.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I got to get some.
All right. So kind of just wrapping up here. I'm very curious. You had talked about the orange, but kind of share what's your classic old fashioned recipe that you really like to use?
Good one. Okay.
I mean, I can tell you kind of what I do, but I'm curious what you do. So we'll share some recipes here.
Yeah. So for me, you might laugh at this one, but for me, I love a traditional old fashioned. I'm making my old fashioned 9 out of 10 times when I'm making old fashioned, I'm typically making it with Knob Creek. I find Knob Creek, their bourbon, right? Because it's a Jim Beam product. So there's a little bit of a nutty flavor to it as a whole, but always great quality, right? So I'm making my old fashioned traditional way, right? The bitters, the sugar, right? And so forth, obviously the bourbon. But, in addition to like garnishing it with the orange peel, for some odd reason, I love just adding in like a mint leaf, right? It just gives a little bit of like spice to it, and it just changes it up just a little bit, right? Just a smidge, just enough where it's still, traditional old fashioned, but gets it a little bit spicy, gets me kind of happy a little bit.
You're throwing me because I've been getting into maraschino cherries, and as a kid growing up, like getting the Shirley Temples, like those rubber cherries are disgusting. And so I've always been like, I don't like maraschino cherries. They're vile. And all of a sudden you start finding those jars of like real maraschino cherries.
Yeah.
And you're like, holy smokes, these are mind blowing. They're incredible. And so
different.
Yeah. So I do an orange twist with a good maraschino cherry.
I like it.
And I usually do like just a spoonful of simple syrup because I don't want to completely tweak the bourbon.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I play with Angostura bitters. I like the orange bitters over the traditional Angostura bitters. I'll use the traditional.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I like both bitters. That's a whole other thing.
Okay.
Bitters are awesome.
Yeah, they are. I like both also. I can go both ways with bitters, but I typically stay with the traditional ones. Typically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, folks, there you have it. I just want to say again, we're Marcus, aka the Bourbon Judge. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about bourbons, to talk about old fashions. For those listening, you can find the Bourbon Judge on Instagram. Again, check out his website, www.thebourbonjudge.com. And of course, find him on YouTube and go binge on his YouTube channel. He has it all covered across the board. I was just watching you do a blind tasting
Oh yeah.
of ryes. You did
Oh
six
yeah.
ryes blind tasting, and that
Yeah.
because I'm getting into ryes again. So I went back and rewatched it, and I'm like, oh, Yahtzee, this is awesome. So
I appreciate you having me on, Brooks. I love it. Thanks, buddy. Cheers.
all right, cheers. Kayak Point is a popular county park in Snohomish County, located about 1 hour north of Seattle. It is nestled along the Port Susan Bay in the Puget Sound. This 670-acre park includes a saltwater beach, playground, picnic areas, and a boat launch, and a campground complete with a yurt village. In the early 1900s, the Killian family developed a resort at Kayak Point, and from 1920 to 1950, Kayak Point operated as a resort. Two of Killian's sons had kept a pair of Inuit kayaks from one of their Arctic expedition trips, there at the beach. Later, these kayaks were mounted on display, and this generated so much attention that the resort became known as Kayak Point. The park supports a variety of activities, including fishing, crabbing, kiteboarding, hiking, birdwatching, paddling, and disc golf. Located to the east, about 1 mile away from the entrance of Kayak Point County Park, is the destination Kayak Point Disc Golf Resort, which hosts a total of 4 18-hole courses. There are plenty of things to do at Kayak Point County Park. There's about 3,300 feet of shoreline to explore, so beachcombing. There's a lot that you can do. There's a lot of driftwood, and so making driftwood forts and playing around that, looking for seashells and beachcombing. Of course, you have all the saltwater activity, so it's a great launching point for your own kayaks or paddle sports, whether you want to do stand-up paddle boards. There's a really long, nice pier that comes out of it that's a fishing pier, so you can use that to drop crab pots or go fishing off of that if you don't have a kayak to go fishing out of. Just make sure that you follow the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife game regulations, and make sure that you're licensed. There's also a large grassy open area, so it's great for flying kites or playing any sort, setting up a game of cornhole or ladder ball or washers or any of those other kind of fun family bocce, those kind of activities. There's a huge playground there for the children that's got a really wonderful play structure that our children really enjoy playing on. There's a great spot with a covered area that you can rent for family gatherings, family reunions, or get-togethers with friends. They have barbecue pits, and you're right there on the beach, so you got a great view. The campground itself is actually up on a bluff, kind of up above the resort, the former resort area. The campground's kind of small, which is great. It's very private. It's heavily wooded and forested. It's really a beautiful campsite. It's very well maintained, and the bathhouse is located right in the center too. So if that's something that you need to know about. Plus, like I said, it has a yurt village, so that way if you're bringing your trailer or your RV there and you have some friends who don't have a trailer or RV, they can easily rent one of the yurts and have nice accommodations so you guys can still gather and enjoy the campground and all the amenities that are there. Other things to consider, sites kind of 5 through 15 do have peekaboo views of the Port Susan Bay, Puget Sound that might be worth checking out. Those are probably some of the ones that book the quickest, so you'll want to plan ahead for those. If you are working remote and that's a priority for you, connectivity here at this campground has pretty poor cellular coverage. They do have some, so you might need to use a booster or something along those lines. There is, like, your RV antenna for TV picks up about 28 channels, but the channels lag and are oftentimes pixelated. So I think the campground is nestled in a little spot where some of that connectivity could be a problem. All in all, this is a really great campground. It's close. It's like I said, it's about an hour away from Seattle, so you can easily get there. There's a lot of fun activities to do. So one of those kind of backyard campgrounds, it's a great little spot to check out. So if you're passing up and down the I-5 corridor between Seattle, Bellingham, Canadian border, and you're looking for a night or two to stay, I totally recommend you look into Kayak Point Campground. You can read more about the campground. You can even read my review that I wrote over at thedirt.com. That's the DYRT, thedirt.com. Kayak Point is a wonderful, family-friendly campground. I would encourage you to check it out. Thanks so much for listening. Our next episode features an interview with Avanti Lawani, the CEO of Brighter Products, a manufacturer of RV solar and lithium-ion battery solutions. She and I discuss RV power, solar, and so much more. Plus, for the pit stop, we dig into the Washington State Ferry and discuss what you need to know to navigate the state's ferry system, especially during the peak of summer RV travel. You won't want to miss this great episode in 2 weeks. So on that note, get out there, explore, and go see what's beyond the horizon. Thanks so much for listening to RV Out West. Join us again in 2 weeks with our next episode. Please like and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or wherever you choose to get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And I sure would appreciate if you left a rating or a review of the show. Special thanks to Scott Holmes Music for providing the intro song, We Are One. RV Out West can be found on Instagram and Facebook, where you can interact with us and follow along on our RV adventures around the Pacific Northwest. So get out there, explore, and go see what's beyond the horizon.